This article just dropped over at the Lunduke Journal, lunduke.locals.com, and I'm going to read it to you now because the story it tells is absolutely wild. It is absolutely wild. There's a lot here, so I'm just going to read through it all. The Lunduke Journal has obtained the legal documents regarding a new lawsuit which has been filed against Mozilla, makers of Firefox, by a former C-level executive. And parts of it read like a Game of Thrones style power struggle within the browser maker. This is not a joke. It is absolutely wild. So here's the basics. Here's the high level. The Mozilla Chief Product Officer, was being groomed to take over as the new CEO. Now, that CEO-to-be took some medical leave to treat cancer. In the days, literally the days before that CEO-to-be returns to work from medical leave, the then serving CEO of Mozilla, Mitchell Baker, was fired by the Mozilla board abruptly, no warning at all, right before the CEO-to-be could come back. The Mozilla board of directors then installed one of their own board members, Laura Chambers, as the new CEO. All of this right before, like moments before, the CEO-to-be could return to work from his medical leave and take over the CEO position. It's wild. There is a ton here, including a tale of discrimination and abuse inside the Mozilla Corporation. Below, what follows in this are screenshots of large portions of this lawsuit, the items of particular interest to tell this story. It's a lot. With each screenshot followed by a brief description and some additional details. If you're short on time and just want to read the article, you can go to lunduke.locals.com, read the article, and just hit all of those descriptions between each screenshot. I've provided all of the screenshots, and there's a lot of them, so that you can make up your own mind about what all of this actually means. All right, let's dive in. So the high level here, the lawsuit was filed by Steve Teixeira, the former chief product officer of Mozilla, against Mozilla Corporation in King County, Washington, Seattle on June 12th of 2024. So just, 6 days ago. Teixeira, I'm probably pronouncing your name wrong, my apologies, Teixeira, the new chief product officer of Mozilla, was brought on board in 2022 and was being groomed to become the new CEO to replace Mitchell Baker. This appeared to be the plan from Baker and at least one of the Mozilla board members. You'll note I'm just kind of moving past a lot of the individual court documents. You can read them on the screen or go read them in the article. There's just simply too much of them to read every single word to you. I'm just going to read the summaries of each. Moving down, as the chief product officer, Teixeira led roughly 75%, give or take, of the employees of Mozilla and oversaw, quote, the entire commercial product portfolio. So this man oversaw everything. I include a screenshot here simply to reinforce that Firefox has been reaffirmed to be roughly 90% of Mozilla's revenue. We've talked about this a lot in the past. I've talked about this in a number of my articles. There's some issues relating to that. It's just interesting to see it in an individual court document. So as the chief product officer, Teixeira was given high performance reviews. It's important to note that he was reviewed quite well and received 105% of his performance bonus on his annual performance reviews. Mozilla opened an entire office branch in Seattle, Washington to specifically accommodate Teixeira, which would make sense if the plan was to make him the new CEO, and it did appear to be the case. Through September of 2023, the plan remained to transition Teixeira to become the CEO of Mozilla. This is repeated over and over again in meetings and emails and opening the Seattle branch of Mozilla and whatnot. Teixeira was then diagnosed with cancer, ocular melanoma, in October of 2023. He then took leave under the Family Medical Leave Act until February of 2024. So Mitchell Baker remained the CEO during that time until literally the days before Teixeira returned to work. Here's where it gets really weird. So Mozilla publicly announced that their new CEO, Laura Chambers, on February 8th of 2024 of this year, According to this legal filing, that decision was made by the Mozilla board internally roughly 1 week prior. This would be, quote, shortly before Mr. Teixeira returned from leave on February 1st of 2024. This legal filing appears to say that Mitchell Baker was fired by the Mozilla board of directors from her role as the CEO of Mozilla due to her, quote, declining performance. There might be a good reason behind that. I've certainly talked about some of the issues with the declining market share and whatnot of Firefox over the years. Just the same, one interesting thing to bear in mind here, the board has continued over this period of time to give Mitchell Baker an ever-increasing amount of money. The amount of money they give her goes up by the millions leading up to this, which would suggest that up until this time, the Mozilla board of directors was incredibly happy with Mitchell Baker, which raises a ton of questions as to why she was ousted right then when there was no externally available massive shift in the performance of Firefox or anything other related to Mozilla that we're aware of. Lots and lots of questions opened up here. Now, the timing here is really interesting. I'm going to read it from the screenshot from the lawsuit for a second. The board decision to remove Miss Baker was so abrupt that they did not conduct a search for a successor, resulting in the naming of one of their own board members, Mrs. Chambers, as interim CEO. Okay. Fascinating here. So according to the legal filing, the firing of Mitchell Baker as Mozilla CEO was so abrupt that they did not conduct a search for a successor, meaning they were in a hurry. For whatever reason, the Mozilla board needed to act right then, and the Mozilla board, which included Laura Chambers, voted to install Laura Chambers, one of their own, as the new CEO. And all of this happened the very moment the person who was being groomed to take over as the CEO, Teixeira, returned from his medical leave and was set to resume overseeing roughly 75% of the workforce of Mozilla. Now, was this the motivating factor for moving so quickly to install a new CEO? To do so prior to Teixeira returning and taking over? Kind of reads like it, doesn't it? I mean, if you don't even have to really read between the lines here. That just is what it looks like. Now, on the first day, his very first day back as the chief product officer, Teixeira was instructed by the CEO to lay off 50 already selected employees. Some of you may remember when Mozilla did layoffs earlier in 2024. So he was instructed to lay off those 50 people that were selected for him. Now, he had questions about who had been selected to be laid off. Teixeira's employees were, quote, explicitly forbidden by the chief people officer of Mozilla, a woman by the name of Danny Chahak, from briefing and assisting Teixeira as he returned from leave. He had questions. So he was the C-level executive overseeing 75% plus of all of these Mozilla employees. He was instructed to lay off 50 of them, and his employees were forbidden from helping him get up to speed on why and who and everything else. They were forbidden from helping him, his employees. Weird. Really weird. Now, Teixeira expressed concerns with human resources at Mozilla that these layoffs would, quote, disproportionately impact female leaders and persons of color. That's what he said to the Human Relations Department. Well, Teixeira was then threatened by the chief people officer, Chahak, that he would be forcibly, quote, placed back on medical leave if he, quote, did not execute the layoffs as instructed, end quote. So in other words, do what we say, fire these exact people, not these roles, not this number of people, but these exact names, and don't talk to anyone about it. Don't talk to your employees about it. Don't get help from anyone about it. And if you don't do it, get out. Holy smokes, they were telling this to the person who was being groomed to be the CEO of the company weeks earlier. Holy heavens. That's wild. Now, the new CEO, the one that had just been installed by the board of directors, Laura Chambers, and the chief people officer, Chahak, insisted that Texera not only announce the layoffs, but that he falsely take responsibility for the decision-making of the layoffs. Like, they wanted him to go out there and say, these are the layoffs, these are why, these are the people that I chose for the layoffs, and take full responsibility for it. According to this document, Laura Chambers was throwing the person that was being groomed to be the CEO, the job that she then took using the board of directors, she's thrown that person under the bus. Holy heavens. Now, Texera was permitted only, this is a quote, permitted only to speak with the CEO and her direct reports, right? So he was not permitted by the CEO to speak with his staff. His staff, roughly 75% of Mozilla, was delayed being moved back under his leadership during this period of time, right? So he was being isolated and controlled and scapegoated and thrown under a bus. If this is real, what in the heck is going on inside Mozilla? There was an outside audit. Now, this is just a kind of an interesting thing, because in February of 2022, Mozilla commissioned the firm Tiange Kemokai Law PC to assess its performance in providing a diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplace culture. So I mentioned this here mostly because it's mentioned in the legal document. According to that outside report, Mozilla's leadership provides a, quote, inadequate response to the needs of a diverse culture and is, quote, incongruent with Mozilla's stated values and goals. Interesting. Texera's former direct reports expressed to him when he came back, quote, deep concerns about leadership in his absence, specifically regarding, this is a direct quote, abrupt changes to strategy and inappropriate or abusive interactions from the senior VP of strategy operations, Subha Vasudevan, and the chief marketing officer, a woman named Lindsay O'Brien. Now, this included complaints made to human resources regarding the chief marketing officer. Now, I should point out that all of these people are still at Mozilla right now. If you go to Mozilla's leadership page right now, it will show you pictures of all of them, including Texera as the chief product officer. Their mugshots are all over the websites right now. They are the people in charge. Now, what those complaints to HR about abusive interaction and behavior from the chief marketing officer, we don't know that. That's literally, it's beyond the scope of this legal document. We don't have that information. The new CEO, Laura Chambers, hired a consultant to assume Texera's core responsibilities immediately after Texera returned from medical leave. Texera then received from the newly installed CEO his first negative performance review ever at Mozilla. Oh, really? I'm sorry. This reads like a hostile takeover document. Texera, once groomed to be the new CEO, now was being forced to move into a new role, which he did not want or ask for. At this time, he was able to work full-time, and he specifically did not request time off, any additional time off for medical care. At this time, he's just saying, I'm ready to work, right? Texera's family had believed that Mozilla was gathering his publicly available medical information to be used against him. I'm going to read this part specifically to you just because it's weird. Mr. Texera's family maintained a public CaringBridge site to provide updates on Mr. Texera's health status, right, to family and friends and this sort of thing. Sorry, I'm getting messages. I just published this article, and I'm literally getting messages from people with inside Mozilla about this article as I'm publishing it, so it's very distracting. They were concerned that the contents of that blog on CaringBridge were being used to inform Mozilla's decision-making about the terms and conditions of Mr. Texera's employment. So his family stopped updating the site regularly in February, and in April created a separate private CaringBridge site, right? So they kind of took everything private, right? Now, Texera disclosed to the new CEO a little bit later, Laura Chambers, that liver cancer had been detected, right? Fairly advanced liver cancer. Now, that information was then shared, according to other statements within this lawsuit, by Laura Chambers with all of her direct reports. Right now, that information was private. And Laura Chambers, the CEO of Mozilla, started sharing it. Oh boy. Oh boy. Mozilla then makes it clear. And at this point, I want to make it clear. According to the legal documents, Teixeira was not requesting additional time off, right? He was not. Mozilla then makes it clear that they wish to demote Teixeira from a C-level executive down to a vice president role, a massive demotion. He declined that demotion. He said, "No, thank you. I decline your demotion," because that demotion would come with a 40% pay cut, and the job would end completely at the end of the year. On December 31st of this year, the role would just end. So basically what they were saying was, you're a C-level executive. We want to give you a pay cut. We want to take away all your direct reports. We want to make you lower level, right? Get less money. And at the end of the year, you're fired, right? So it's just like an off-ramp to get rid of him quietly. So he declined that. I think I would too. Now, Mozilla CEO Laura Chambers then disclosed significant private details of Teixeira's medical conditions to other Mozilla employees without Teixeira's consent. Oh my gosh. If that actually happened, Mozilla is in a world of legal hurt. Chambers also told other Mozilla employees that Teixeira would be demoted, the demotion that he had just rejected, right? So she just told everyone that he was going to be demoted, and he was being demoted because of his medical issues. Oh, jeez. I mean, oh my gosh. The legal issues that they face here are just off the charts. A keynote here. Teixeira had, quote, not requested additional flexibility related to his disability, right? So he had cancer, but he was not requesting any time off for it. He was ready to work according to these documents. On April 25th, Teixeira made a complaint in writing that he had been discriminated against because of his cancer. Pretty straightforward. If this is real, that's a pretty straightforward complaint. 2 days later, on April 27th, the CEO of Mozilla, Laura Chambers, retaliated against Mr. Teixeira. According to the statement, the words of this legal document are literally retaliated by telling him in a nutshell to, quote, take the demotion, that is just not a direct quote. It is just my interpretation of it. It is take the demotion or you're fired. Here's the direct quote so that you can have it. On or around April 27th, Mrs. Chambers retaliated against Mr. Teixeira for his complaint of discrimination by issuing an ultimatum. Quote, your three options are to accept the role as presented and begin work, to accept the role as presented but go on long-term leave, or to not accept the role and move to a severance conversation. In other words, take the demotion or get out, you're fired. That's what that means. That's executive talk for what that means. Source, I've been an executive in tech companies. I know how this goes. Now, Mozilla, over the next couple of days, began panicking, instructing Teixeira not to discuss anything related to his employment with Mozilla, with anyone, even going so far as to draft up a new non-disparagement and non-disclosure document with new restrictions. I'm just going to read a little bit to you here because I thought this made me laugh. On or around May 2nd, Mrs. Chahak, remember she's the chief people officer at Mozilla, instructed Mr. Teixeira not to discuss issues related to his employment at Mozilla with anyone. Mrs. Chahak questioned Mr. Teixeira about whether he had talked to anyone about issues related to his employment. Mr. Teixeira did not answer. I don't think I would have answered either. And then promptly a couple days later, out come the new documents with new restrictions and new NDAs. Holy smokes. And by the next week, I'm just going to read from the lawsuit here. On or around May 6th, so 4 days after that, he was presented with the new NDAs. And by the following week, Mrs. Chambers, Laura Chambers, the CEO, canceled her one-on-one with Mr. Teixeira. His executive assistant was reassigned and his chief of staff was fired. right? On May 23rd, Mozilla placed Mr. Tuxera on administrative leave, and Mr. Tuxera's direct reports were reassigned to other Mozilla executives. Holy smokes. Holy smokes. Mr. Tuxera requested a reason for being placed on administrative leave. Mozilla did not provide Mr. Tuxera with a reason why he was placed on administrative leave. They wouldn't tell him why. Mozilla cut off Mr. Tuxera's access to email, Slack messaging, and other Mozilla systems. Mozilla instructed employees not to communicate with Mr. Tuxera. Oh my goodness. They went full scorched earth. Holy heavens. Let's scroll down here. A few weeks later, an investigation was launched into Tuxera's discrimination allegations. However, Tuxera was never contacted to participate in the investigation. This is strange. To say the least, that is very, very strange. Normally, when you have an investigation, whatever it is, any sort of HR complaint and whatnot, which is what this was, all parties involved would tend to be interviewed in one way or another. Depending on the company and their procedures, you'd have internal people like internal counsel and lawyers do the interviewing. A lot of times what will happen is they'll contract to an outside firm, some sort of outside law firm, to do the investigation, but they would always contact all legal parties and they would interview all of them. They'd take statements from all of them. They would write all the details down. He was never contacted about it. Weird. That suggests that this was not an above the table, above the board sort of investigation. In fact, I'm going to put air quotes around this. It's not really an investigation. That's what it sounds like to me, right? It would be extremely interesting to see the full results of this investigation. I'd be very, very curious. Very, very curious indeed. Mozilla continued to falsely state that Tuxera was on medical leave and provided Tuxera's medical details to other employees without his consent, which, if true, means Mozilla is likely going to be anxious to settle this whole thing out of court. Because if that's true, oh my word, they do not want this going to trial, because this is not going to go well for Mozilla, right? Now, this resulted in multiple Mozilla employees being led to believe that Tuxera, quote, would pass away imminently. Oh man, this poor family. Which obviously would be pretty distressing for both the remaining Mozilla employees and Tuxera and his family. Holy heavens. Oh my word. Now, based on the details of this lawsuit, now I want to caution everyone here, should the details all prove accurate, it certainly doesn't paint Mozilla in a good light. And we got a CEO that was ousted abruptly in the moments before a new long-term groomed CEO-to-be returned to work from medical leave and get ready to take over, right? And like in the minutes beforehand. And the Mozilla board acting with lightning speed to install one of their own into the CEO position. Then we've got tales of silencing, scapegoating, discrimination, abuse. This raises a ton of questions about what exactly has been going on within Mozilla, especially recently over the last, 6 months or so, and how specific individuals rose to power within the organization. A lot of questions. Now, this document that we've just gone over a good chunk of course, is merely one side of the story. Should this case move to trial, we would hear Mozilla's side of the story. That, however, seems unlikely, as these sorts of cases, especially when they appear this strong, tend to be settled pre-trial. Mozilla's not going to want this to go to trial, which means we're probably never going to hear what Mozilla's side of the story is at all, for better or worse. Now, the Lunduke Journal has reached out to both Mozilla and Tuxera for comment. As this is an ongoing lawsuit and Mozilla has a strong track record of silence and secrecy, no response is expected. We reach out to Mozilla regularly on issues far less interesting than this one. No response is ever given, right? And so we're not going to receive a response on this one. And in general, when you have an ongoing lawsuit, the statements from both the companies, and the plaintiffs and the defendants usually tend to be by request of the legal counsel, no statement at this time while the active lawsuit or active investigation is ongoing, right? This is just a pretty standard sort of thing. So we're not likely to hear any sorts of additional statements around it. However, this does raise a ton of questions, and what I'm curious about is whether or not we will find answers to some of those questions, specifically around what the heck is going on here. Because it does, if you take aside for a moment the pain and suffering that this gentleman is facing, no one wants to have to go through all of these sorts of cancers and this sort of medical treatment. It is stressful and hard and difficult for him, for his family, for his friends, for his coworkers, for everyone, right? But if you put that aside for a moment and you just look at the strange details that this lawsuit brings to light about the exact moments where the new CEO of Mozilla took power, it looks like a massive power struggle. It looks like it was done specifically to make sure that that guy, right, Tuxera, was not able to become the CEO. It looks like it was done specifically to make sure that a specific person from the board was installed in the CEO position, Laura Chambers. And Laura Chambers being one of the persons that voted to make it happen. It looks like a Game of Thrones style power struggle for the kingship. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I would love to hear from Laura Chambers. I would love to hear from any of the C-level executives existing at Mozilla around this. I would love to just hear from the press department of Mozilla, but we're not going to. We're just not going to. So what we're going to be left with is seeing if any additional court documents are filed, seeing what the actual tax filings for Mozilla Corporation and the Mozilla Foundation are in the coming years, because they always lag behind by a year or two. It takes forever to get those documents out. So we're not going to see all those details for a while. And if any additional leaks come out from within inside Mozilla, I would like to, on that note, say to anyone who works at Mozilla and is a bit distressed by what's going on and has information that would be interesting to this, if you go to lunduke.com, one of the links near the top provides a link to a page which gives you instructions on how to become an anonymous whistleblower to provide documents to the Lunduke Journal in the most anonymous ways possible should you wish to remain anonymous. And the Lunduke Journal has a very firm policy and a strong track record of not ever, not even when requested, informing anyone, the public or corporations, of who sources are. We've handled leaks from Microsoft, Red Hat, IBM, etc., and not ever have we divulged the identities of whistleblowers and leakers from any corporation, and we weren't about to start. In fact, this particular document was provided by a confidential source, and that confidential source will not be disclosed either. So again, if you go to lunduke.com, you can find more information on that there. Whew. All right. And again, if you want to go through this in more detail and read all of the nitty-gritties of a lot of the text that we had to skim over for time, go to lunduke.locals.com. I'll try and provide a link wherever you're getting this show over to that article, and you can read all of that there as well. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerds and nerdettes across the inner tube, I do declare, end broadcast.